Oh.
That's fine. Hi, my name's Amelia.
My name's Jay.
And this is Raising Barbarians, a podcast on being human. Today we're going to talk about doctors. And I want to talk about several things going over that, like some of our perspectives about what their current information is, why they can't give good information, how they've been going so long with giving bad information, and some of the examples we've had that in our life and general examples that you've shared with us, whether you know it or not, about why doctors are problematic. Any of those sound the most interesting to start with?
They all sound very interesting. So you have a little notepad. Did you want to read one of the things you want to talk about?
These are, so I was going to start with just talking about credentialism in general.
Okay.
About why looking to experts. It's very popular in our society to look to experts, and it can cause a ton of problems. And in the case of doctors, the way we got onto this as a topic for this week is because in
your book that you're
in
reading?
my book, it's The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Other Stories by Tolstoy. He talks about all these problems that exist with doctors, and the saddest, funniest one that he kind of talks about is his wife is constantly bringing doctors into the house. They have 5 children in this something sonata. Should have written it down. Kortzer's sonata. And she keeps bringing doctors into the house to help with whatever's wrong with the children. And he talked about how much better it was before. This is written in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Like a sweet village girl, is how he puts it, would realize that when your child dies, that's God's decision. And now, with all the experts around telling you what to do, when your child dies, it's because you've done something wrong. You should have given different medicine. You should have had them outside more. You should have
More doctors?
Outside
More doesn't seem like one they would say.
In the 1800s, it would have been normal to prescribe
That's a good
fresh
one.
air.
That's a good prescription.
Yeah.
To be outside more.
And I think that that's a very, we can go through all the things that are wrong with the prescriptions doctors give, and we're going to, but just as a strong starting point, there's immediately a problem with looking to experts about what you need to do, because now the fault is on you for not figuring out the right thing. And it hasn't always been that way.
So, how did it used to be in the barbarian times?
I can't say for sure. I can just say that there's an idea that there used to be something else, which is sometimes children die. And the idea that was the fault of the mother, that children die, was not the default position.
Yeah, I don't know that they blame mothers now necessarily, but there is...
Mothers blame themselves now.
Maybe. There is certainly I know that when our firstborn Xander got a fever, I was at work and you felt the need to bring him to the hospital, even though I told you not to. And then, later we learned that it's okay to have fevers, and they have all this stuff out there.
Hold on, just to be clear. I was already extremely comfortable with fevers, actually. He got up to a very high fever, which is what I was
like
sitting,
the 103 or something?
104. I was sitting pretty at 100, 101, 102, 103, and then he would keep going up to 104 again and again after I would break it again and again.
And it's okay for a fever to be high, and that's actually good. And as long as the fever isn't, this is what I've learned since, is that as long as the fever isn't the result of some kind of like bacterial infection, like spinal meningitis, which they like to scare people with, bacterial spinal meningitis, or which is very rare, or some kind of bacterial infection, it's actually fine to have a fever. And antibiotics can't break a fever. If you have a bacterial fever, you can take antibiotics, and maybe a day or more later, once it starts healing the infection, that will get rid of a fever that's caused from a bacterial infection. But turns out he had a virus, and it became very obvious he had a virus, and antibiotics can't really help with that.
Mm-hmm.
And antibiotics cause a lot of other problems, and the whole reason behind having the medical community have this control over antibiotics is supposedly so we don't just overuse them, but I think they are part of why people overuse them.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think people would reach for antibiotics nearly as often as the doctors prescribe them with the information that we currently have.
Scare people into using them. And we recently had an experience where Xander had a very serious pain in his mouth, and we couldn't get into a dentist. And they saw him, but they wouldn't do anything. But they said, "Here, take some antibiotics." And instead, we just did saltwater rinses, and the mouth wound healed completely up, and he got better when they were talking about having to just pull the tooth out.
Yeah, and even further than that, with my problem that was going on with my teeth, they looked at it and they're like, yeah, you've got no issue here, but since we're not going to be able to take the tooth out for a good long while, we want you to take preventative antibiotics. But taking antibiotics to prevent something would reduce the good antibiotics in your system. So it seems to me, having not dug into the literature, that could possibly make you more at risk for exposure to dangerous bacteria.
Probably.
If there's a particular bacteria you're trying to kill, then antibiotics might make sense in that, but just killing bacteria doesn't seem to make a lot of sense if what we're looking for is a balance.
So yeah, they wanted him to take antibiotics. They wanted to rip his tooth out. And so if we give him antibiotics for a month or however long, that's going to cause all these problems. And then if they rip his tooth out of his mouth, that's going to change his entire jaw. And that's going to cause all kind of problems later down, even more problems. And there's problems upon problems. And I never thought about how important the jaw is to everything. But it's very important to have a certain jaw shape and have all your teeth. And once you start messing with that, you open the door to all kinds of serious breathing issues, and having a breathing issue can lead to sleeping issue, and having a sleeping issue. So it's just
honestly, air like air quality, ability to breathe air and everything was known. I would say in the 1800s, right? Heidi was a very popular book, came out in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the whole thing was that she had to go out to the country all the time because she didn't have good air.
Yeah, I've seen the movie, and I've read the kids version,
Yeah.
where she's sick and they bring her to the mountain and she gets strong with the mountain air, and Heidi was really homesick for her mountain home.
Yeah.
And they're like, why should a kid live up on the mountain? But that it made the mountain living made Heidi's cousin or whatever she was very healed her. She couldn't walk.
Yeah.
She was like a very weak person. She's being overly protected and overly cared for.
And this is sort of one of those things where now they, like, regarding something like the plague, they might say, oh, how ridiculous these people are for the miasma theory. Like, there was something wrong with the air and that everybody was getting the plague because it was just in the air. But actually, your inability to breathe properly and breathe clean air absolutely makes you more likely to get sick.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd be less likely to get rat-infested fleas with plague if they just went out to the country or something and got out of...
Yeah, sure, but also your ability to fend off bacterial issues.
Sure.
Or viral issues if you have a body that is properly detoxing, right? Like a body that has all the things in it that it needs in order to get bad things out of it, then you're going to be less likely to get sick overall.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the story that we talked about earlier about the air curing the really interesting case.
Yeah, we talked about there's a story, I don't have all the details of who it was, but there was this teenage boy, I think, and he was dying of some lung thing. I think he had one disease, and then ended up getting also like I think they were treating the one disease. I think he was getting treated for leukemia, and then he ended up with like a lung infection that was going to kill him. And they removed half his lung, but he was still like, okay, you're going to die. And then he said, what do you want? He said, I want to go outside. So they moved his bed out into the sun, and they kept him outside. And then he completely healed up and survived and got better.
Yeah.
All his problems went away by going outside in the sun.
Which is not to say that, going out and none of this is to say going out and breathing clean air and being in the sun will solve all illnesses or anything like that, right? But rather that we
have a bad hospital system that really takes you into a very tough, like if I went into a hospital very healthy and strong and then had to lay in that bed in there and be in that environment cared for by those people, I would feel very sick going in there healthy.
Yeah.
So if you go in there very sick, now you're very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think it's wild how people like you actually had it both ways where we wanted all our kids at home, but because of a situation, an ambulance got called while we were having a home birth for our second child, and you did have him in the ambulance, and then you were stuck in the hospital for a little while.
During COVID.
And yeah, it was during the height of COVID back in 2020, and it's not a place you really want to be with your baby. And they're doing all these weird things like he's too big, which he was just like a normal healthy size. So they're like wanting to prick him and take his blood every like hour or something wild like that, which that's not good. Or they wanted to like put all kinds of antibiotics in his eyes, which we didn't let him do. And of course there's circumcision, which they like to do, which all our boys are intact.
It's actually, I have that as one of my notes. It's actually, this is the first year, 2025 was the first year that there are more baby boys in America kept intact than circumcised ever.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
And that's not something that was pushed for by our healers or doctors. That's something that's, I guess, do you know why that's happening?
It's one of those things, in the last episode we talked a bit about like AI and smartphones and everything. And the internet has been a bit of a two-sided coin on this, right? I think that this is just the proliferation of information that would ideally come from using the internet and connecting with each other and everything, because it's a very weird thing, obviously, internationally to circumcise your boys. That's not,
Sure.
If you go over to overseas and you were to say like, oh, well, you got to circumcise
If it was
kids.
Europe, I think
Otherwise-
obviously like the Middle East and other places, they do it a lot.
Yeah.
But yes, Europe compared to the United States, and yeah, it's great. If I saw no reason to do it. I know some people have this argument like, well, it was done to me, but that doesn't mean anything. And you want better for your children, and then as far as it being cleaner or whatever, I don't think that's true.
No.
And a lot can go wrong when you do that, and it takes away a lot of the feeling, and
It's also just like if it's not necessary, it just is.
it can cause more
feels very
stress in a young, like they say stuff like the baby can't feel it, but it's very stressful and painful for the baby.
The idea that babies don't have nerve endings is ridiculous. Of course they can feel it. That's why they scream and cry when it happens. And then
they of course don't use any pain reliever, because that would be another intervention which would be very dangerous for the baby.
That one's too dangerous. That's where they draw the line.
Like, we're not going to put this baby to sleep
Under anesthesia,
or make him so he can't feel his privates.
Yeah. I thought that was really, really good news that more people are choosing to keep their boys uncircumcised. I really wonder the history of how that became so popular in America, since it's not really popular in Europe. Yeah. Let's see. There it is. Another interesting thing that came up recently was just about, harking back to the thing with Tolstoy saying, now we lay the blame on what goes wrong with mothers. That has increased over the time and over the decades, and even since we were children, obviously, we rely on doctors a lot more than we did at the time. Recently, our son got a black eye, and it actually became a question for us, even though we're not super big fans of doctors. The medical establishment would be a better way to put that, but is do we need to go to the doctor for this?
Yeah, and for me, it was get an eye doctor to look at it, which eye doctors aren't MDs, at least the kind that I go to, like an eyeglass place, and it's a lot more less scary. Just like, okay, here's what we think. You want these drops, so just to get him some drops if they thought it was needed. But his eye seems to be. You think it's coming along fine?
Yeah, it's coming along fine. But when I think back, what I had been saying was that if you think about the movie The Sandlot, and Smalls gets the black eye, there's not like really a question. Do they slap on the piece of steak on his eye when it happens?
Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. But we never would have 30 years ago gone, oh, a boy got a black eye, we should go to the doctor. Just kids get black eye sometimes. And again, my point is we are not people who want to run to the doctor for everything, any doctor of any kind, but it has become so inundated in our society that every time something goes wrong, we start to question, is that the right thing to do? And it would be interesting, just like the book The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America exists, about how our education system has gotten to the point where it is. I wonder what the book is that's how they've tricked Americans into thinking, well, people worldwide, but Americans in particular, into thinking that they need to talk to doctors for every possible thing that goes wrong inside of them.
Yeah, and I don't think we need to do that. I was just like, do we need to get a doctor to look at this? I was just thinking about it, and it wasn't. If I had gone to a doctor, it wasn't like I'm gonna listen to what the doctor says and like, okay, he thinks this or she thinks that, whatever. It's not that I go to the doctor and I try to stay away from the doctor because I do appreciate that there's a healthcare system, but I think there's a lot of bad incentives in the healthcare system, and it's not set up to people who go to the doctor more are less healthy, and not just because they're sick. They're getting sicker by going to the doctor more often. It's not just a correlation, it's a causation. And obviously you'd expect people who are sicker to go to the doctor more, but there's also people who go to the doctor more are going to be more sick.
Yeah.
Just by going to the doctor and following that advice, taking the medications, taking the health advice, taking the antibiotics, and a lot of the advice is there's a lot of like pharmaceutical companies that have interests in controlling what doctors do and believe. There's the insurance and trying to do things that they have to do to have malpractice insurance, and they have to have malpractice insurance because they are afraid of being sued. And there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily about your personal specific health.
So this is like the concept of doctors being under regulatory capture, right? A lot of their jobs, they turn into paper pushers rather than people who are helping the consumer at all. So they're also constantly on the lookout for what they did and didn't do that can cause lawsuits, as opposed to actually figuring out the best way to help somebody. And that causes, there's just a lot of bad incentives set up in a system where, whether it's being captured by pharma, of course, that's the biggest, most obvious one, but being concerned about, if I don't prescribe this thing, that's going to be a huge issue. And if I do prescribe this thing, that also can cause a lawsuit, and it puts people in a tricky position where they're figuring out what's the least likely to make them liable, as opposed to what's the least likely to get the results that the consumer would want. But it's not right to call people consumers of healthcare, because it's too heavily government regulated for that to be the right term. I think another reason that doctors are going to end up having very bad incentives, and doing the wrong thing and not looking at the science is because they have to justify their own life choices in the system that they're within. They need to, right? They're performing system justification whenever they do anything, at the same time that they're performing that they're victims of their own cognitive dissonance, right? So it doesn't matter how much new information comes in that should make people change their mind if they've spent thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of $1,000s, 10, 20, 30 years doing something. And they're also in a position where if they do the wrong thing, they'll lose their community or be in legal trouble. All of those pressures makes it very hard for any individual to come out and do the right thing.
Yeah, I feel like on YouTube, there's more and more doctors who are like, yeah, I'm a medical doctor, but you can just do this test or you can just eat this diet, and they're kind of pushing back against the idea that you need to go into the doctors and do what for your health, do the whole traditional route. So I think there are a lot of doctors who are pushing back, but that's not the. Also seeing doctors who are, screaming and crying about vaccines or whatever. Like the one time when we went to the hospital for Xander, and he hadn't had all his vaccines, so that doctor was upset about that, and they seem to think it was a virus.
You don't know what kind of infection this could be.
Yeah, acting like it could be anything since he's not vaccinated. But it doesn't really hold the sniff test, and vaccines are its own topic, but there's certainly a big conversation going on right now where a lot of people have a lot of questions that haven't been answered.
You were saying about vaccines or about
vaccines?
Yeah. There's also a lot of people who feel that their questions have been answered and have made decisions one way or the other.
Sure.
I think that the question about whether or not, some doctors coming out against the standard AMA advice, at least to some extent, that is, again, a question of incentives, because if you are now able to make a lot of money saying that makes it easier to say it, as opposed to just being kicked out of the profession that you were in. Now, if you can use your credentials to make a living that's quite good online, saying what you actually believe, that changes the scale. And once it's accepted more and more by society that there are going to be people doing it, it becomes less socially costly to become one of the people doing it. So, which isn't to say, everything you said is right. I'm just saying, there's...
I think there's always...
I'm glad to hear the skill. It seems to me the skills are changing on that.
There's always been a lot of money to make in selling things that work, especially if they're unregulated. If you can just start selling liver pills and be successful at that, there's a lot of money in that if you can do it. And liver pills are something that are good for you. Eating liver is good for you. Liver pills is just the food freeze dried, so you're eating the pill instead of eating the actual liver. Yeah,
but having science / the government behind what you're saying helps to validate it, and people no longer feel the need to do any research on what your prescriptions are in general if you are credentialed, as opposed to selling a particular cure or supplement.
Yeah.
I do think, obviously, I've been taking beef liver for 6 years now, so I'm 100% behind using that. I was just saying, as far as the money making goes, one is a little bit more stable and reliable than the
Yeah,
other.
there's a system to plug into, which if you're got a patent or you're buying a patent or if you have a certain degree, it's for guaranteed.
Yeah.
And you've already done it. You can do this, this, and this, and then you get this, as opposed to if you try to do something like make a health YouTube channel, you could maybe see a high upside, or you could just fail.
Yeah.
Which there's yeah. Is there something else you want to talk about? We might be wrapping up soon.
No. What you just said is one of the things. One of the things that, for instance, being a doctor has that having the YouTube channel has a lot less of is it can feel as though you're taking a huge risk when you're doing certain things and making certain choices, and it doesn't feel like a huge risk when you're making other ones. And any institution is going to blur your reality to assess risks because it makes something seem more certain than they really are. So becoming a doctor feels like, well, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'll do that and I'll make this money and that will be certain. But if I start a YouTube channel, then that's all flip of the coin. But the truth of the matter is that becoming a doctor, or in what I'm more concerned about, following doctor's advice, is a much higher risk than it seems like. It seems like if you listen to those people, then you are likely to get the results that you want. But it's just not true. You're often likely to get the opposite of the results that you want. And that doesn't mean doing nothing or following some other random person's advice who acts like they're professional on things is the right thing to do. You gotta, I would say, actually watch out for what your body's doing, what your kids' bodies are doing, and not get caught up in information overload from official sources or unofficial sources.
Yeah, so I think it's very important to teach your kids about health. If you have ingredients in your kids' food that is whole food ingredients that aren't flavorings or dyes or things like that, then that is a great place to start. One ingredient, there's certain ingredients that might seem like whole foods, like vegetable oil, which vegetable oil seems to come up a lot as being this newer oil that was pushed as healthy, and it's not actually a vegetable oil. It's surprising that they're allowed to call it. It's a seed oil, and the seed oils are one of the things that we've been watching out for. So that would be an example of an ingredient that sounds very natural. Vegetable oil, natural flavor sounds natural too. So I would say don't put natural flavoring, don't put vegetable oil in. I'm not completely against soy, like especially like soy sauce is fermented, but I watch out for soy. And we want to do a podcast in the future about testosterone, so we watch out for things that can affect create more estrogen in your body. So be careful about the water you drink. Make sure it doesn't have, it's clean water, good water. And yeah, vegetable oils, corn, like certain starches, like cornstarch or corn syrup, different stuff, high fructose corn syrup. You gotta watch out for certain processed foods. So both foods, vegetable oil is an example of processed food. High fructose corn syrup. Corn syrup is a very processed food. Less processed, more whole foods, the better. Probably the more. What's that? I like keto, but there's also paleo. Something that's Lindy. We're talking about getting like the old type flour, old type, sourdough bread as opposed to the new bread. Sourdough bread made from a sourdough starter, maybe more of a flour that hasn't, not like a white flour that's had a bunch of, what are those things they fortified, all those things, fortified cereal. Be careful about the amount of sugar, added sugar you're eating, things like that. I think fruits can be okay in moderation, but probably avoid like the syrups made from them or the concentrates. Try not to eat too much sugar. Dunkin' Donuts is like the biggest seller of coffee, and like there's a video recently that there's more sugar in a Dunkin' Donuts coffee than like a 2 liter, one of those big bottles of Coca-Cola. And yeah, be careful about how much sugar your kids are getting, and don't let your kids snack would be my advice, or don't snack yourself. Eat inside of a window and have meals, and then protein. Put heavy protein, especially earlier in the day. Make sure there's protein each meal. We talked about meat. You didn't talk about that, but there's been like a thing against meat where they're trying to make it seem like plant-based diets good, but a lot of these places with very healthy people that live a long time, they have very meat-centered diets. Like Japan, they eat a lot of beef, or you were talking about.
Yeah, so it's really fun. I got to looking at, I'm really interested in the blue zones, not because I care particularly about living a tremendously long time. That's neither here nor there. It's not something we can control, but I'd really like to feel good while I am alive, and I think that these people who are living to 107 probably feel good a decent part of their lives, though not all of them. There are some very funny ones that are shockingly nihilistic if you look at the interviews, but nonetheless, and it came across my feed at some point that Japan actually eats a tremendous amount of red meat, and so Japan is not a blue zone. Okinawa is. I haven't looked at all the details of that yet. But I did look at Sardinia off the coast of Italy is one of the blue zones. And there's actually like a commission there that came out and say, hey, can people actually know what our diet is? So Japan as a country, not Okinawa in particular, compared to some dietary recommendations, they 640% of what the dietary recommendation is for red meat. And Sardinians, they came out and said, hey, can you tell people that we eat a ton of lamb, a lot of suckling pig, so pork, and a ton of milk. So these places, while 2 out of 6 or 7 blue zones, these places that they keep trying to say are, plant-based diets, at least 2 of them eat a ton of red meat. So it will be interesting as I go through this process to see how much it's true of the other areas if they eat red meat, but that does not mean that they don't eat a ton of plants. They do.
Right.
So it's not just that.
All right. Are you ready to say bye, or do you have anything else you want to say?
I think I covered most of the things I wanted to say.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Subscribe, share, like, comment.